All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to OpenHour. This Open Hour, we're going to be talking about art and environmental science advocacy. So this topic came about, I think like a lot of us have been thinking about different advocacy in different ways recently. And one of the avenues that isn't explored as often, I think, in the public lab space is the idea of art as an advocacy tool. So although we thought about this on what exists on Public Lab, there actually are a good number of people who do use art as a media in environmental advocacy. So in hopes to bring some more attention to the understanding and ideas about art and how it can help contribute to environmental advocacy, we're hosting this Open Hour. So I'd love to go around and just do some quick intros of who we are, where we're calling in from, and one thing we're interested in talking about and sharing on the Open Hour today. So I'll start. My name is Stevie Lewis, and I'm calling in from New Orleans, Louisiana. And one thing I'm interested in talking about is that I don't consider myself a very artistic person, but I find art a really powerful tool to open up discussions. And so I'm kind of wondering a little bit about how, as a non-artistic identifying person, I can ping in and sort of exercise my brain in that way and engage people, whether it's through current art that other people have used, or exploring my own artistic talents in new and challenging ways. So I'll just go around and from left to right on my screen and who I see. So Liz, if you want to go next, that'd be great.
Sure. Hi, I'm Liz. I'm calling in from Brooklyn, and I am really excited about hearing about people's projects on this call. And I have to admit that I did just do a travel with an art and environment project called the Aeroscene, where we were flying solar balloons.
Nice.
Through some snow-covered mountains. And it was quite the statement about climate, because they were solar powered. But I didn't really come here to talk about that. I'm just saying hi.
Great. Matej, you're next in my lineup.
Okay, hi. So my name is Matej Vakula. I've been at the barn raising 2 years ago, or like year and a half ago, right? So I'm an artist working with scientists and also with public space, and I'm a lot of into DIY science, and I have a couple of projects with kind of analog data visualizations and gaming of environmental data that can help and to advocate for open source urban planning, and I'm interested in open source architecture and alternative research and so on.
Great, thanks, Matej. Catherine, you're next in my line.
All right, hey you all. I'm Catherine Dionisio. I'm a professor of data visualization and civic media at Emerson College in Boston. Background is in arts and design and software development, actually. I'm also an organizer with Public Lab. And I've done several projects that relate to art and environmental advocacy. So one is a project where we did what I called a walking data visualization, where we traced the coastline of Boston as a kind of a tour. But it was the future coastline of Boston based on the rising seas of climate change, and sort of paradoxically is also the past coastline of Boston, because Boston was a city that was very sort of human constructed, so it's like all filled in land. So we were tracing both the past and the future coastline of Boston, and did kind of a tour at the same time. We had guest speakers to talk about some of the issues. And then I have this side project that I really want to realize in a permanent way called the Babbling Brook, which I think a lot of people in the public lab community have seen, which is a talking flower that sits in a creek or a body of water and tells really bad jokes about the water quality, like based on the like conductivity and flow and turbidity of the water. And so I really want to like realize that project for real. It's still in prototype form. And I would love to talk about, I don't know, I'd love to talk about a couple of things. Like one of the things I'd love to talk about is how art can be used to, in a way, like move people who are not already committed to something. So how art could act as kind of like an entry point for people to care or to connect with an issue. And then I guess the other thing I'd like to talk about is like the sort of tension in art and advocacy work, like between those two things. So like this curator, Nato Thompson, talks about that being the tension between what is didactic and what is, which we tend to think of as advocacy, where like advocacy has a clear goal and a message of some kind. And then art, which often goes more near towards the like ambiguous, so sort of ambiguous statements that are hard to read and take some time to sort of decipher, and sort of where do we value those things. So I think about those things a lot as sort of how art is somehow different from the kind of, you know, someone handing you a flyer and being like, you know, do this thing. It's a different way of communicating than that. But then when we go totally towards the ambiguous, we lose something too. So anyway, I kind of love to talk about that tension if people are interested in that.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. And for those who are new and missed the beginning, we're just doing your name, where you're calling in from, and one thing you're interested in sharing or having a conversation on with the people on the call today. So it looks like next in my line is Jason, if you're up for an intro.
Hey, I'm Jason from the Natural History Museum and the group Not an Alternative, whose project the Natural History Museum is a project of. Hi, Catherine. We curated doing a show a few years ago at iBeam, the participation show.
Yeah, totally. I remember that actually, and I met you guys even longer before that.
Yeah.
During part of the Conflux.
Yeah, that's right. At our space, you presented. Yeah.
I saw your all's names. I haven't seen you in forever, so hi again.
We started a project a few years ago called the Natural History Museum. What am I interested in? I don't know. We've been digging into science recently, which has been fascinating and kind of broke our brain for a long time. So I feel like we've sort of come out the other side at this point, and we have sort of positions on. We've sort of established our positions and are testing them out in these contexts of the science march organizing, and so I'm interested in discussing the intersections between art and science.
Cool. Great, thanks. Joshua, are you able to go on next?
Yes, hello, good evening. I'm out of Philly and I teach at Haverford College, environmental studies and anthropology. And with a bunch of community groups in Philly and an artist on some environmental studies curricula with kind of arts-based components in them. And I won't be able to stay on the call for very long, unfortunately, but I just wanted to hear a bit because it sounded awesome.
Oh, great. And actually that brings up a good point, because a lot of people will actually find Public Lab through the OpenHour recordings. So they are recorded, they're posted up on YouTube, and there's an archive of them. So even if you can't catch the call today, you can follow up later, and we put all the notes online as well. So catch us later if you need to hop off. Ned, are you available?
Yeah, can you hear me? I'm calling in by the phone, so I can see things on the computer. My audio didn't work on the computer for some reason.
Gotcha.
And
Hi. So I've been working with public labs for several years, and I work at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, but actually live in Vermont. And I've just, in the last couple of years, I've been working with an artist, and I've really been intrigued with the possibilities, kind of the interface between science and art, and especially biodiversity conservation and art. And I guess advocacy is wrapped up in that as well. So I'm just sort of curious and interested to hear what other people are doing.
Great, thanks, Ned. So I'm assuming then you're the 605 phone number as well.
I'm not calling from 605. I'm calling from 802.
Okay, is there someone on from a 605 number? All right, that's fine. All right, so just in hearing a couple things, is there that everyone's interested in talking about? Is someone want to put forward a first topic for Open Hour?
Maybe we could each share one project. A small enough group. I would love to just have each person talk about one current project that they're excited about, they're working on, or a past project, or something like that.
That sounds great.
Yeah, that would be interesting, yeah. And then also what you, Catherine, mentioned, that tension between the didactic and art projects and stuff. That would be cool.
Catherine, do you want to share about a project you know or one that you've heard of that you're interested in discussing? I'll put you on the spot to go first.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's fine. I can just show you all the, actually, can I do screen share?
Yeah, you can. Down on the bottom in the middle is the green button.
Green button, share screen. Oh, okay. Well, I can try to share, let me see. I can try to share the Babbling Brook project. Hold on. Okay, one sec. Okay, so I'll just play like 1 minute of this video if this works.
Okay.
Okay. Can you see this, Stevie?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, here. So now it's going.
Friends, I'm 5.25 inches deep and my temperature is 48 Fahrenheit. Feeling groovy. Feeling groovy. Knock, knock. There? Water. Water. What are you doing in my creek? I am rolling on the floor, laughing out loud.
So it goes on. I'm not going to like take up the whole. All right. So that just, it keeps going. Oh wait, it does keep going. Hold on. Okay. So it keeps going, and like, so the basic idea was I was working with Public Lab, and we had just started this project called Open Water, where we were doing things with water sensing and seeing if we could build some cheap DIY water quality sensing things. And then I was thinking about artistic applications of this, and in particular, actually, like environmental education applications. And so that's sort of where this project is situated now. Actually, like the person that I'm talking to about doing this in a real way, like this video just shows a prototype. But the basic idea is that this flower thing person sits in a body of water and is continuously monitoring and sensing, but it's doing it in a very public way, whereas a lot of the monitors and sensors that we put out into the world to monitor the environment are designed to be super unobtrusive and, you know, I mean, for good reason, like practical reason, like you don't want them to be stolen and messed with. But this does it in a very public way, and it tries to make jokes about the water quality, but it's not really that funny, so it makes really bad jokes. But it's also trying to communicate something about what it's measuring and what kinds of parameters go into measuring something like the quality of a body of water. So things like pH and conductivity and stuff like that. So that's the project that I'll share. It's totally work in progress. I have this idea that we could make it participatory in the sense that if it were at an environmental education site, then it would be a great prompt for kids to write comedy material for it that the thing could then recite, but they would have to learn like what water quality parameters are and like how to make jokes out of them. And so I feel like that's like could be a really fun sort of challenge to write comedic material for a talking flower. So yeah, so that's the project that I'll share. Maybe the next person could go.
Sure. Is there someone up for another project to share?
Yeah, sure. So I have this like a horrendous abbreviation for one project I'm working on, and actually, I mean, it's a project under development, but I'm trying to establish some sort of alternative research institute, which is called Open Source and Space Administration Institute. And because part of that thinking is one project I did earlier on, where I'm trying to think about open source and how could open source open spaces and maybe landscapes to bigger participation of anyone who would like to do that. And yeah, so I think it's kind of like worth to maybe start looking into what could open source do with either architecture, or how could we enter some realms of like urban development or urban planning, and how could we make maybe urban plan open source. And so because of this, I invented some sort of one of the projects which this institute, imaginative so far, well, is developing is Project Manual for Public Space, which is going on already for 4 years. And that's a sort of a traveling library and a little sort of scientific laboratory that allows several different communities to research place which they could and want rebuild. And part of that is actually an interactive game, but the game is offline. It's analog game, sort of a tabletop game where several different sensors or environmental DIY scientific tools, as for example some tools from Public Lab, could interact and build a landscape where people could interact, or the community members could conduct urban planning in analog forms. And yeah, it's kind of like a tabletop game which like is very open and open-ended, and based on that, people can actually later on take action and figure out some. I mean, I know I'm talking very abstract forms, but you can see that on my website, which I will put the link a little bit later on, which is not like super finished yet. But anyways, people can take action, and they already did, and reclaim some spaces. Or yeah, I'm just looking into these borderline meeting points where data could interact with and create community, and how actually art could interact within that. And within that position, open source is, I think, very great idea to look at things with using like sort of a new perspective. And also I'm doing other projects where I'm working at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Research Center with scientists and nanotechnologies and like kind of high-tech, high-end stuff. And I was very happy that I could do, actually for the Science March, I conducted several workshops with them, with the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Research Center, where I helped the scientists to create a protest signs, and then we marched together during the march. It was really interesting to observe how did that work, because they didn't, like, they were really wanted to be non-political, but they wanted to march. so it was really interesting, like kind of fusion of those two things, and it wasn't bad. Like it was really interesting new approach from their side. And then also I did another workshop with the Science March with GenSpace, which I'm a member of too. And GenSpace is a sort of a public laboratory in New York, but it's more like working with genetics and with also environmental awareness, but with a little bit different point of view. So yeah.
Thanks, Matej.
Thank you.
Josh, I know you're maybe going to have to jump off. Do you have a project that you would want to share or talk about?
So I guess the one that relates most is a project that's just getting underway, working with 3 community environmental groups in Philly and an artist named Lee Sumter on creating curricula that she's going to help bring the arts component to, and the community groups will build from the ground up in conjunction with my students. And we haven't gotten very far. I just got a pretty small grant to do it from the Mellon Foundation. They have these collaborative arts grants. So it emerged out of conversations with several of these community groups who were saying, we want curricula that relates to what we're up to. Some of them are doing urban farming. There's an organization called Friends of Mount Moriah Cemetery, and they're an amazing group of folks who basically took over this cemetery that the city was going to turn into a mall. And because some of the community members had people buried there, they had a great deal of emotional attachment to the land. And now they want to turn it into an environmental education center. So conversations around the city with folks just made it clear that there was this real lack of curricula that they felt was relevant to what they were up to. And then this grant came along. It was like, oh, cool. It's like an art-based community grant for like $70,000 where we can actually have some money and pay people to do some cool things. That's the project that's actually happening. My fantasy project is this like weird superhero, like Salamander Man. We're like to create like an amphibious human-powered vehicle, like a bike that turns into a boat, and that like is decked out with like environmental monitoring gear. Go up on site, and it's like have like sort of like a Batman crossed with like a Spider-Man kind of character. That's like the more far-fetched one
that sounds awesome.
So if anyone has any ideas on like how to engineer such a
I have someone you should talk to. This guy named Matthew Mazzotta, M-A-Z-Z. He's a really good, and he's done a bike project before. He's an artist, but he's really good at building really large scale, impossible projects like that.
All right, cool. Wait, how do you spell his last name?
Matthew, and Mazzotta, I think. Here, I'll post a video link in the chat. Really awesome project called OpenHour that he did. And he could totally, he once built a bike that could be, it was called like the bike bus that could be ridden by like 20 people at the same time around the city. That would be totally somebody to collaborate with.
Salamander Man, he's coming to a disaster site near you.
That's awesome.
Spill near you to clean it up. So yeah, those are a couple of the ones. But the project you just showed, I could imagine some of the folks I'm working with would be really intrigued. I can imagine there's a few creeks in the neighborhoods. I can imagine.
Oh, nice.
Kids loving it.
Yeah, I think they could get really into making their creeks talk.
They would,
you know?
They would go crazy for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done a couple tests with my own kids and their friends, and just with like a little speaker, and they could get the speaker to say things, and they went bananas. So.
I don't know if this is the time to ask questions, but is that something that you're up for visiting with other folks with and helping them reproduce it?
Sure. I mean, it's very prototypey right now, you know, like it's not like I don't have a beautiful thing that could be like immediately stuck in a creek, but yeah, we can totally, we could build, like the public lab has the cookie sensor, which I've taught lots of workshops around, which measures basic conductivity.
Right.
Mostly educational, because I know there's a couple of problems with actually using it in the field for really measuring stuff, but it gives a good sense. People can build it in like a half an hour, even with no background, and start to use it to measure things. And then we can start to connect that into kids actually being able to make speakers talk through their computers and stuff like that.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
And you made great documentation on that too, Catherine, you and your team up there.
Yeah, we have a whole like educator's guide, actually, if you're interested in that, just specifically to the Koki, and to like, it's like a whole module for doing storytelling. Like it's reflecting on like the practice of journalism, like doing journalism, but we use the Koki as like a demo, but then it launches into a activity where then they reflect on, well, how could journalists and storytellers use sensors like this to tell stories, basically.
Ah, excellent. Should I send you an email about that?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool.
Okay, and we can put the links up here. I'll actually collect all the links and post them with the OpenHour too. So we can put one for the Koki up, and any others, just drop them in the chat, and I'll put them all together.
I have a quick one to share, and then a kind of a topic to open with it.
Cool.
Let's see, how do I share this? Can you see my screen? Can you guys see this screen? It's a little pixelated, but it's some aerial video from some floating shapes in the sky over Antarctica.
Wow, it's amazing.
This is a collaboration called the Aeroscene, and Thomas Saraceno is part of it. And I just wanted to bring this up as a kind of project that embodies a different relationship to the environment. It floats by solar power, like just the radiation from the sun warming up the air inside the balloon more than the surrounding air. And as sort of like a very small self-contained atmosphere, it begins to float. And holding on to the line that's attached to these things, you can literally feel solar power. And they're so graceful in the air. My video is kind of glitching out because my computer's old, but they move so slowly, and they let you tune into atmospheric dynamics in a very different way than reading a report on carbon dioxide parts per million in the atmosphere does. And the reflectance, there's like a bit of a twist on this here, because it's the reflectance of the snow and ice that's giving even more lift to the balloon by reflecting more of the sun's heat up. And that's exactly what's at risk now with the receding ice sheets, that there's less and less ice reflecting out the excess heat, and it's part of how our planet's heating up. So it kind of flies because of it, and also it really brings the point home of like what a concern it is, the loss of the ice. And I wanted to kind of put out there that a lot of art and science collaborations, because there's a lot of scientists working on this project too. The MIT Department of Atmospheric and Planetary Science, I think I botched their name, sorry. You know, have like custom atmospheric models just for this project. So that people can track if they floated in a balloon right now, where in the world would they end up? It's kind of a speculation on like post-fossil fuel human flight, although these balloons aren't big enough for that. But the kind of art science collaboration here is really notable because it's specifically not merely translation and not merely data visualization. It becomes together something new, like a new way to live, a new way to relate to the environment. And I wanted to put that out there because a lot of times an art science collaboration it does neither field justice, in my opinion. That's my provocation I wanted to put out to you guys. And I'm stop sharing my screen now. Thanks.
Thanks, Liz.
Liz, are those videos online anywhere or just on your computer?
Oh, you're muted, Liz.
They're not yet released by the studio. These are all pre-cuts.
Mm.
Yeah, we'll publicize them once they're like all gorgeous and stuff.
Yeah, I want to see the full effect. There's a kind of helpful term that I really like your publication. I had this colleague, Kelly Dobson, and this is totally her term, but she coined this term data visceralization, which I really like that term because it's sort of like when you can feel data versus when you just can see data like with your eyes. But data visceralization sounds kind of like what this maybe does as you're like holding the line with the and feel the balloon and feel these different shifts in a like very tactile kind of visceral way that, you know, a graph or a chart or even the atmospheric models maybe don't necessarily communicate.
One of the things I was thinking a little bit about was this topic came up for me when I was in Wisconsin just recently, and I was with a group of people that were talking about climate change, but it was a group. They were from all over, and they had all kinds of different backgrounds and everything, and it was sort of like a how do we talk and communicate? And this woman, she kind of spoke a little bit about how, you know, with her community and her family, she can't actually talk a lot about some of the big environmental things that are going on because they just innately don't agree and they don't believe her and they don't. And so it's like a quick stop for her to open those kinds of conversational doors. And which I think is something that we've all, we know exists. It's a struggle, you know, we've all had, or it's been around for a long time. And it's like environmental issues are politicized. And she was referencing, and I guess I was kind of surprised for myself, but to hear her talk about, because she had such trouble with talking about anything related to science, that she saw art as like an avenue for her to sort of engage with her family about environmental questions and issues. And I guess I was wondering if anyone else has experience with like, well, there's the end of science and like how can we bring and mold science and arts? Like what about the spectrum of, and I think like Josh, Jason, sorry, your comment sort of brought me thinking about this again, because you said that we had come, you know, you dug into science and now you're out the other side. And I'm kind of wondering if any of this is relating to some of the things that you were thinking about, or if that's a different thing.
Trying to think about it. I mean,
I didn't mean to put you on the spot if other people have thoughts on this, but yeah. It was the comment that you made that I was like, reminded me.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's interesting how do people react, because like, you know, for example, when I start doing these workshops on public space, which many times ends up being like environmental questions, actually, like if you want to reclaim some space or you know, just like build a community at some place of space. You have to see what's in the soil and what's going on. And I don't even say usually that this is art, because it's kind of like more surprise. It's better for these people to see like, what is this weird thing here and what are we doing, and then they will more open to anything we talk about than just say outright it's an art project. That some people then will kind of refuse that maybe, or like not take it seriously maybe, even though it might be serious, of course, an art project. But yeah, that's really interesting, like how to approach that. But then art, or the art part, would gives it an interesting kind of like it can shift people into interesting different thinking, but without telling them it's art. kind of more as the section of like opening more their minds. And I mean, it depends what is the public too, like who you are working with. Just sometimes when there are professionals, that's very different, but usually when it is like public, so I mean, I think that often it's better not to say that, and then later on kind of sneak it in. Or maybe not at all. But the principles and the influence is there, of course.
Yeah. Or even conversely, to say this isn't science.
Yeah, because of course, I mean, we shouldn't, like, I know that there might be some artists which think like they're doing science, but of course, I don't think that they're, or not really, but I mean, it's very hard to be artist and scientist at the same time, and do like valuable science at the same time than you're a science artist. So, but there might be people who do that. So, but it's super rare. So what I'm saying is like, it's like there's no way maybe for artists to reach the like super PhD level of a scientist in science as an artist, but maybe there are some people, just very little. So yeah, I don't know.
I could speak now to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just think, for us it was it's kind of a matter of getting into science, and getting into these questions of it's just like this giant hole of what is neutrality. This question of neutrality in science, and different perspectives, different opinions, and how that factors into climate denial, the history of neutrality and when it comes to science. Then, in relation to truth, facts, nature, all of these questions are like, so we're dealing with science communication. So we've been involved in a few recently. I mean, we've been with our Natural History Museum. We started in order to get inside the museum sector and radicalize museums of natural history and science from within. And we started from the outside, kind of with a provocation, demanding that David Koch step down from the board of the American Museum of Natural History and the Smithsonian. So we launched a petition starting with a sign-on letter that got 550,000 signatures, and we started with 150 of the world's top scientists, Nobel laureates, etc., signing on to this thing, and then we eventually got him kicked off the board. But at the same time, we started this Natural History Museum, thinking that we could get inside the museum sector and radicalize it from within, because we imagined that there were people inside who were kind of, we knew that there were people on the inside who were very sympathetic to these ideas. That's the reason why they work in natural history museums. So it got us, so it basically opened up all of these very large questions for us about what is science, what is nature, what is neutrality. When we were arguing with the Natural History Museum about that they should engage issues more politically. They should factor in, they should accept the fact that their sponsor actually has an effect on their programming, even if they believe it's neutral. There's still these, public relations. That's the reason why the reason why they're sponsored in the first place. All of these things. So it opened up all these questions for us. And then over time, we realized that in order to do the kind of work that we really wanted to do, we had to abandon the campaigning sort of activist strategies that we had been primarily focused on and shift towards more work with groups inside that are associated with the museum that have agency to transform it within. So indigenous groups and scientists became our focus. So we've been more setting up, organizing scientists, indigenous groups, which brought us weirdly when Trump got into organizing scientists. So first thing we did was organized a demonstration outside the American Geophysical Union, Physicists Union in San Francisco, which brought out 500 scientists. And so we were thinking about, this again, it's like, I'll talk about the kind of strategies in terms of communications in a second, but that was the first step. Then we went to the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science in Boston. And 3,000 scientists came out to that. So, and at that point, the AGU and the AAAS were the director, like the kind of administrative, the governing body, were resisting the protests basically. But because of the kind of communications that we're using, I think they eventually signed on. So they signed on by the time the Climate March rolled around. The biggest organizations in science had signed on to the Science March. And then we did the visuals and the kind of communications around that also. And then also, so dealing with similar stuff also with indigenous communities. The project I was going to show was more of an indigenous project, or indigenous ways of knowing project that we're working on, the Carnegie Museum of Natural History.
Can you show it?
Sure. Yeah, I can show that. This is, we were just there meeting with the director, and so this is sort of shifting to, can you see that? Does that work? Yeah?
Yeah.
Works.
Okay, so basically, so we shifted to thinking about, rather than doing these demonstrations, that we just realized that basically we started, and the museum sector, the American Alliance of Museums, which is the biggest, it's like the mother of all museums. It's grants museum status to museums in the US. They invited us to their annual convention while we're running this campaign against the American Museum of Natural History. They gave us a space that was 9 times larger than the Smithsonian space in the American Museum of Natural History, directly across from there. So we reproduced dioramas from inside their museums while we were running this campaign, So it was like we were getting support from the mother organization. So there was a lot of kind of pressure that was involved in that. But now we've sort of shifted away from that, and we're working with sympathetic allied museums. So the Carnegie Museum of Natural History, which is one of the top 5 museums, we've been talking to them about setting up this exhibit. And what you see here is a totem pole, which is produced by the Lumi Nation, which is based out of Bellingham, Washington. And they've been successfully fighting Coalport Terminal there, and they have a master carver, Jewel James, who's been producing totem poles for these journeys that have gone to various sites of climate, struggle, including Standing Rock, for the last 5 years. So they've primarily gone to, indigenous communities and sites of struggle, encampments, So our interest is in bringing them into museums and activating these static dioramas, these displays, which are presented as historical artifacts, and activating them with contemporary socio-political content. So the totem poles would be presented on the trailer that it travels on, along with the documentation of the journey. And then along with these objects that would be presented in these pedestals, which would be collected along the trip with audio stories about the impact. Like they're stories of struggle and loss related to environmental change. But it's a bit of a Trojan horse strategy, because we're trying to bring something into the museum that looks relatively innocuous, although it has some political content there. It's not like smashing them over the head, but at the same time, the indigenous environmental justice communities have been using this red line as a signifier. So it was very present in the COP in Paris climate talks, and then they just did an action outside the White House. So this is why the red line is present here, and why the trailer's red, and why this kind of curved collection of objects on pedestals would be red. So it sort of signals to the indigenous communities that this is part of this struggle. So it's this kind of back and forth that, we can leverage the power of being internal to the museum, the authority of the museum that we gain from being on the inside, and then doing this kind of campaign work on the outside. And the point is to kind of radicalize, similar to the work that we were doing with the science institutions. The goal is to do the same thing with museums of science and natural history, because museums of science are basically the public relations front of science. That's how people see, so there's more people that see museums than see theme parks in the US than see theme parks and sporting events combined in a year. So they're powerful sources of disseminating information. So anyway, basically a form of radicalizing institutions of science.
That's such an interesting point. And I guess one thing that I have never really thought about before is I really feel like people see museums as like speaking the truth. And I'm kind of like, I'm wondering if you, I don't know, this is like a revelation I haven't had, maybe other people have, but where science has had such a challenging time talking about like what truth is, or talking about climate change and those things, where you have people who say, well, climate deniers, and museums are so often, I don't know, I feel like within the public perception, just seen as something reliable in what they show. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, just a side note.
Yeah. Oh, that's not it. Science March. I just wanted to bring this up just because most of our messaging actually had to do with food, which actually intersects with my understanding of art. So you kind of, there's no definition of art, obviously, and like there's no definition for science. So you kind of have to establish your own coordinates for defining what that means, and then you work according to that. So I'm not gonna find an image right away, but basically, our definition of art is essentially that and our working definition as a collective and our interest is in art, in basically revealing what is hidden or excluded, those unspeakable things. And they're typically, that repressed, typically it's an unspeakable that is repressed. So it's like not yet kind of present in the popular consciousness. It may be there, but so this is our working definition for art, and this is how it intersects with politics. It's what is unspeakable because of a political context. So when it came to art, it was like, how does that is there a correlation there? And then the more we talk to scientists, we realize that there's the creative process that is involved with science is, I mean, it's a totally creative process. You have to be willing to go out on this incredible limb to trust your judgment and not to know whether or not the thing you're testing is going to make any sense. I mean, that's what artists do in their own practice all the time. And it may result in just, people being like, that was insane. And, you're spending your time in your studio doing nothing. You feel that way. I mean, typically as an artist, at least I do. But at the same time, the good, for us, good art or good science, good scientists make their name by essentially destroying what is accepted as the given knowledge. So we posit a distinction between truth and knowledge. So truth is that thing that you strive to attain, and knowledge is what is existing, what is operating as the consensus. So nothing is like true in the sense, it's always something you strive to produce. So art, science, and politics intersect in this place for our practice, and it became like kind of an easy way for us to do our basic science communication. So the primary thing we're focusing on there was science we were talking about science standing for the common good, and science speaks truth to power. Just making science not so much just about neutrality, but making it really about standing for the things that are the unspeakable. And if you think about, the political context that we're in terms of science, what is at stake is not all science. I mean, Trump isn't against all science. He's against the science that is going to hurt, that impacts communities. It's environmental focus attacks. So.
I have a question, Jason.
Sure.
I'm really curious about the marches that you all were organizing. Was that not an alternative that was organizing the marches, or was that?
No, we were just part of the kind of central organizing committee.
Because I just found that so interesting that you guys are organizing scientists in a way as outsiders to that group, right? And so was there ever any pushback to that? And or also I was wondering, like, did you in the organizing work, like, do you think about that as advocacy or art or science? Like, do you consider it any or all of those? I mean, to me, because it's most straightforward as advocacy, but I'm just wondering if like some of the more performative elements make it also like art, and also in a way kind of your outsider status in those communities. So I'm just, I'm interested.
I think it intersects with art for us, but it doesn't overlap exactly. So sometimes it is just advocacy, but at other times, certainly. I mean, our thing is about like we are called the Natural History Museum, and our project is at the naturalhistorymuseum.org. We have costumes. It's all a fake front. It's basically if you dress in the costume, and this surprised us immensely when we realized basically all you needed to do was sign up as a natural history museum, and they take you seriously. Like Beka goes, as our museum director, goes to the Science and Natural History Museums directors convention every year with the top directors of these various museums, which is how we got into the Carnegie. It's just you wear the costume and you say you're a museum director, and you can go to the directors conference. I mean, they don't expect you to be able to do that. But this for us is like an art. This is a strategy that comes from our art practice. It's like just realizing that that ultimately it's exactly your project of like corporate commands. It's like you can basically dress up in the corporate outfit, and you can act out the things that the corporation invites you, basically is inviting you to do without just dressing in a costume. So these are sort of strategies that we're redeploying in this context. And then just, if we're a museum, if you're a science museum director, you can be a science march organizer. So it's sort of like just smoothly shifts into the next register, I suppose.
I'm just fascinated. I mean, I just think it's really interesting. And then also, Matej, you also have an institution, like a performative institution as well. So it's
Yeah, I was just
these interesting connections between like art, performance, truth, and institutions, advocacy work, interfacing with the public, and like also Matej, what you were saying about it, like it maybe not really mattering whether it's art, it's like it's some kind of engagement with publics, and sometimes it's performative, but sometimes it's performative and earnest and real, like it's false and real at the same time, authentic and real at the same time. I don't know.
I would just like to note also that this is also very different from artists working in a lab. And because as Jason was saying, so it's very different, because I work also as a artist in a Center for Molecular Imaging and Nanotechnology at MSKCC. That's where I'm majorly based, and that is actually very interesting and quite different situation than working with museums, because a museum is already sort of a setup to be a display or the meeting point with the public, and it has, I would say, maybe a little bit closer to art than to work in a lab or in a lab environment. And over there's just kind of more maximized the intention of like not to be political, and to be as much, basically the scientific kind of approach, that to be most open to anything that can come up in order to notice it from the experiments or whatever, but that melts or transformed into a scientific culture, basically. And so yeah, that was just a very different situation, and also very different things kind of you talk about or don't talk about. So yeah, but it's interesting that anyways this approach of like trying to be the truth, and what was Jason saying, that is the interesting thing, that it's kind of it has a lot of in common with art, but I would even say that it's sometimes more creative than art, and as a result, science is actually creating a culture around itself. And the question is just like it's really interesting culture to observe that. I cannot define it yet 100%, because it's not actually what we imagine under the when we imagine science or museums, but it's much wider and goes more into the knowledge and knowledge representation and knowledge sharing, and that's where the culture lies. And it's really interesting, also from the scientists, like why don't they, because I mean, we can say so scientists don't want to protest because they have grants from whoever, but the truth is that I think the culture is just sometimes not there. I'm not talking about museums, I'm talking more about like labs and these institutions where you have to have an ID card to get in. So that's a little bit different, but those people also think that right now they are endangered because of the funding, but I hope in the future it won't be only funding. And so with Jason, that would be like an interesting question actually for me to know how to go maybe beyond the structure of museum and more, because also scientists like museums, but there's much more scientists outside of the museums. and how to maybe reach these people, and how to work with the scientific culture. Basically, that's a big question.
I want to pause for just a second. I do want to get into that question, but I want to just say for whoever's on that needs to jump off on the hour, thank you so much for coming and joining Open Hour. I know there are a couple people on here who haven't had a chance to speak or anything yet, so I do want to go through this questions and leave the line open, and anyone who hasn't had a chance, please speak up. But just wanted to thank everyone before people jump off who need to go for coming to Open Hour. So I'll pass the question back over. So thank you. Sorry, Liz, you're muted.
I forgot what the question was.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I totally interrupted that flow. Matej, do you want to just give the question again?
I'm sorry, what?
I made everyone forget what the question was.
Yes.
I think the question was, what about working outside of museums, right? Is that was, I think that was the question. I mean, I also just wanted to bring up, like, I think this is really interesting because in a way it's a question of like, what are the cultural norms of different disciplines, and scientists definitely have cultural norms. I'm currently in I'm in a department right now, which is a journalism department, so different from science. But one of the things that I've learned coming into like this new world of like people who are basically practicing in newsrooms is that like all of these fields have their different norms, and so journalists have norms that are really interesting and different, like very different from sort of artistic norms. And so thinking about like when do we want to shift? A lot of what we're talking about is shifting norms, and so like what Jason was talking about is the radicalization of museums, but it's really about shifting norms in terms of thinking about like what is my role right now, and what should my role be, like, and that's maybe where scientists are getting uncomfortable because they're getting into positions where and the norms of the field have not been to be political. Like that has been actually the anti-norm, right? It's not seen as the good thing to be political because that it doesn't seem to be compatible with science necessarily. And we're currently in a situation where it's getting very politicized. And so I think that's what's interesting when we're talking about like whose norms should we be shifting, right? Or should we be working in museums? Should we be working to shift scientific culture? Like what is the right venue in this sense, if the work of art could be said to be about shifting norms, which I think we're seeing some really good examples that it's attempting to do that at least, right?
Because right now I think there was a that there's like science has its own problems too, like talking about equality and like racial or gender equality and like many other things, like that's not solved at all. Even I received some emails when some people realized that I was helping to organize that march for Memorial Sloan Kettering, so that like part of the march or the intention like was kind of racist, like there were some emails circulating behind that, but I mean I did it, and I don't think it was the intention, but this email was kind of or article. I can share it if I find it a little bit later. It was an interesting article, but that was exactly about yes, there is still institutional racism within science, but they're trying to tackle that. It's super slow, but there is being some progress made definitely from like 50s, 60s, 80s, 90s up until now. But it's still not solved. And then, but the question is then, do we have to now, at this moment when the whole science is basically under attack, are we going to protest at this day against this or against Trump, basically, like how to define the enemy and how to like what to do about it, because I mean yes, science has not really a lot of there's a lot of unresolved things too, as in maker spaces or hacker culture too. Like there's predominantly male white upper middle class or middle class. So yeah, I mean, but that's, yeah, just sorry, I'm talking too much.
I'm just going to say, y'all, I'm sorry, I have to get off. I have to go help put children to bed. But I really enjoyed this conversation.
It was nice to see you.
Thanks for coming, Catherine.
Yeah, it was great to see you all, and to learn about the projects and to catch up about work. So, Stevie, are you gonna? You said you might collect the links.
Yeah,
Send them out to us or something.
I will. Well, so I moved all the open hours onto an open hour archive page. You can get to it from the open hour page.
Okay.
So they're all archived there. And then if you post anything in the chat, do you see the chat box here?
Mm-hmm.
I'll collect all the links and put them at the archive.
Okay, cool. That's great. Jason, maybe you could post some of the links to your work.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thanks, y'all. I'm going to sign off.
Bye.
Bye.
I wonder if we have time for just another 2 intros, because I don't think we've heard from Dr. Caitlin or Haley before, or Hallie.
I think, Dr. Caitlin, you're on mute if you're trying to speak.
They might be on their phones, and if so, I don't know the unmute command.
Hello. Hi.
Hey.
Hi. This is Caitlin speaking. I just joined the chat because I was interested in seeing what a online webinar was from the public lab. I'm trying to get more familiar with the happenings of public labs. I am an immunologist and ceramic artist, so that's why this conversation means a lot to me.
Cool.
And I'm also working on building my own makerspace. So you said some few things about so yeah, that makerspace will combine art and science and engineering and technology and math. So all of these things apply as well. I don't really have much to say about museums as we were discussing, but I was curious to hear what Jason said there too.
And where are you?
I'm in New Hampshire. Yeah, I'm Plymouth State University.
Awesome.
And what about Hallie?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for this presentation. It's been really interesting so far. I'm a graduate student. I'm finishing my master's at the University of Vermont in natural resources in about a week. And I've been doing art for many years, and I'm really interested in the intersection of art and ecology and activism. So this is really interesting to me. I've learned a lot so far, and additionally, I saw a great lecture from Sarah Wiley earlier this year. So that's how I learned about Public Lab, and was really excited to learn about all of the great work and engagement that you're doing through this organization and others. So thanks again.
Wow, great. And I can't resist being regionally organizing minded. In about 5 months, there'll be a gathering up in New England. Is it Vermont, Stevie? The Leaf Fest happens?
Where, say that? Are you talking about Leaf Fest?
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, as far as I know, it's a Vermont thing. Have to talk to Chris.
Yeah, we'll see if it happens again this year, but there'll be a really nice event up in your neck of the woods that'd be great to actually meet you guys in person at.
Great, thank you.
It'll hopefully be out on the local public lab list. So if you go to publiclab.org/lists and sign up for either the Boston or Northeast one, you'll get information about it.
Yeah.
Great, thank you so much.
Great. Any last comments or ideas or links to share?
It would be great to get links from the Natural History Museum, and I was going around following a lot of social media accounts while you were talking, and it'd be great to share your work more. I think it would be very interesting to the public lab community to learn more about it. And Matej, any additional links you have, we would love to have them.
Oh, Matej, you're on mute. Matej, you're on mute.
On mute.
You're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, I will post some. I'm on my cell phone, so it's kind of hard for me to do that right now, but I'll definitely try. Or definitely additionally a little later. Yeah, but it was also, Jason, it was interesting to see your presentation, and it wasn't, so there was, I don't know if you noticed, but there was this alternative art school fair in Pioneer Works, at Pioneer Works kind of 5 months ago, I think, or so. And yeah, I just, maybe you might be interested in like getting into that too, because there was a lot of alternative institutions, kind of, you're a sort of, I would say alternative museum, but there was more like alternative schools, but also some museum type alternative places, so that you could be interested in that, maybe, I don't know.
I just say, like, to answer a bit, you had asked the question about, where there might be a space for science. I mean, the primary place that we've been organizing, believe it or not, and exhibiting is at conventions. So anthropology conventions, science conventions, and museum conventions. So, we've been doing exhibits there this year. After just 2.5 years, we're speaking on 4 panels next week at the American Alliance of Museums annual convention. So getting kind of, because that's the place where the larger discussion, the larger questions about the institutions as a whole come up. These questions of, racial diversity and inclusion, for instance, they come up in those panel discussions at those conventions. So, and there's a kind of public intersection there, because those are the big museum conferences that have meaning in terms of their size for the larger, media public. They're kind of interested in, oh wow, there's some, the largest, convention of earth scientists is happening in San Francisco. That's kind of like, especially after Trump, gets elected, that there's already meaning built into that. So our sort of strategy was like, if we can sort of piggyback on that energy and that event, and that's where there's this kind of public intersection that we could kind of blow things up and kind of push these questions that are bubbling underneath the surface that many people would like to address, but kind of haven't figured out a way. We're just sort of catalyzing those conversations, pushing it a little bit. So I think in that way, the museum, I agree entirely about the lab, but we felt the same way about museums. Like when you go to a museum, like we thought about how are we going to target, like if you go to the American Museum of Natural History, it's a massive institution that grants PhDs and does tons of research. It's, if you bike lock yourself to the doors, you're not going to make friends with anybody because everybody loves that. It's too big. So it's similar in a way to the problem of the lab in the sense that, there's a kind of closed, it's like the institution is too large and impenetrable, but at those conventions, weirdly anybody can go and you can be in the audience, and it's a very small world of people who are kind of decision makers and influencers. So if you get inside those circles, we're also, we're discussing the climate. The New York Times, for instance, just hired, I don't know if you've seen this, but they've hired a climate denier, one of their staff writers. So
wow.
We're tonight.
What's his name or her name?
you know the name?
Brett Stevens. He's their new columnist.
Brett Stevens.
Oh.
So he just wrote his first article. So just tonight, Beka wasn't able to attend. Normally she would be talking, but he's on a call with scientists about doing an op-ed about his writing. Hopefully it's art. Hopefully I'm like hitting some art buttons also at the same time as I'm, whatever I'm talking about. It's like, it's a lot of it, a lot of the work we talk about we talk about it as institutional liberation. And our organization is called Not an Alternative. So ironically, we're an alternative institution that calls ourselves Not an Alternative. Cloaks ourselves in something that is not an alternative at the same time as we are an alternative. So I think my background is art, so these things all kind of make sense to me. But hopefully it makes sense to you guys.
It's great. It's been an absolute joy having you on.
Great.
Awesome.
Okay, I'll try to post more. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. You can also, if you have other links, you can't grab them right now, you can email me, stevie@publiclab.org, or I'll update. It'll take me probably a day to get this uploaded onto the archive page, but you can add links on there as well.
Right.
You can edit it.
Oh, cool.
So.
Cool. I see that, Matei. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. It's been awesome. Yeah, I'm really, really excited. I feel like my mind has been opened a lot. Thank you.
Great. Keep talking.
Have a good one.
Yeah. Take care, guys. Nice to see you all.